We've been to Bradenton, we've been to Greensboro, and now we're moving up to a place that is near and dear to my heart and is the nearest affiliate. But I mean, I've been going there for years. Unfortunately, only made it there once this year, and that was for the home opener. We're going to do an Altoona Curve 2024 season recap, bringing back John Moses, voice of the Altoona Curve. That is no H and at, spelled with a Z. John, how you doing today, brother?
I'm great. I'm great. The crowd goes wild for this appearance every year. So I'm glad to be back. Thank you again for inviting me. It's always fun to recap the season with you.
Yeah, and here's the thing: is I always I didn't want to traumatize you by playing "Everybody Loves Curve Baseball" again. I do have that queued up here, someplace, but unfortunately for the Curve this year, that song probably wasn't played as much as Curve fans, Pirates fans would have hoped. Last place in the Southwest Division, 62 and 76, getting unfortunately for the Curve, bad publicity even here at the Pittsburgh market. Just because of the strikeout rates, that was a big topic. And here's the crazy thing is that the Curve weren't even the worst team within, the Pirates affiliates. And I didn't mean to shock you there, John, to throw you off a little bit, but they were striking out in the beginning of the season at a pretty steady clip.
Yeah.
Finished third in the Eastern League with 1,268 strikeouts. But like I said, it wasn't as much as some other places. The thing with them was not a ton of power, only 97 home runs, not a high OPS, 653, 11th. And then also the average sitting around eighth at like 231. Guys that we were kind of counting on that we had talked about during the preview, nobody just really got it going consistently for the Curve this year.
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, you had sort of an interesting mix at the beginning of the year with more veteran guys, right? Like Seth Beer, his first year in the organization, Aaron Shackelford back in Altoona after, he'd sort of gotten passed on the first baseman depth chart by a couple other guys. But, some of those veteran guys just didn't perform. It was a little weird, right? Like Seth Beer got a little bit better in his time with Altoona and eventually ended up in Indianapolis, but not a ton of power, right? So it was really a strange year. I think that some of those veteran guys that you sort of have in your organization with the idea that they like raise the floor of your team at AA and they raise the floor of your team at AAA, guys that like have experience playing at those levels and have had success. Those guys just didn't have success this year. And there's a handful of them, right? It's not, it was Dustin Peterson, it was Joe Perez, mentioned Beer and Shackelford and some of the other veteran guys that were around, like, even on the pitching side, Chris Gow, Cade McClure, minor league free agents who they thought would be helpful double and AAA relievers that just, didn't quite live up to what they were hoping for. And that happens from time to time. Like, what are you going to do? But it was a little bit of a strange year in Altoona, for sure.
Yeah, and the guys that I was thinking of, aside from the veterans, were, Sung-Chae Chang, who we had talked about at the beginning of the season, Sammy Siani, who came up from Greensboro after spending like 3 years down there, but still fairly young guys. I believe Siani, like 23. Chang is 22. We're seeing, Siani out there in the Arizona Fall League right now. If anybody's, still following the minor leagues like myself, and seems like a few other people, it's not, as hyped as it had been previously. Obviously the eyes on, Tamar Johnson and stuff. But for Chang, like I saw an improvement in his defense this year, which is something that we've talked about, how guys have done it before, like Liover Peguero made some jumps and leaps and bounds with his defense in Altoona. And I saw the same thing from Chang, but a guy that has always hit for like a good average, a decent OPS, ends the year sitting, below, it's like 662, I believe his OPS was around. Sitting there for the season. I mean, for him, it's a fairly disappointing year.
Yeah, I think offensively that's probably fair. But I will say that like defensively, you are right on the money. Got way better from the time from when he first arrived in Altoona. He sort of became a guy you could really trust, right? Like ball hit to him in any area. He's got great range. He's got a strong enough arm. He's got a great like internal clock, like understanding the speed of his opponent and how quickly he's got to get the ball out. If there's a bobble or if it's a slowly hit ball. But yeah, it was a little strange. It felt like early in the year he was kind of hunting some power, which I'm not sure that's really who he is as a hitter, right? Like he's 5'7", he's 175, 180 pounds. He's a guy that should be spraying it all over the yard and trying to hit line drives and use his speed. So I think early in the year that was part of his bugaboo, was that he was maybe hunting for a little bit more power. I will say that like as the year went on, it seems like he was hunting for it less, and then the power came more often, which is like, one of those interesting little tough things about hitting, right? Like you can't try to hit a home run. You just have to try to put a good swing on it, and hopefully it goes over the fence. So it was a little bit of a weird year for Z, but sort of finished it off on a high note, and got an opportunity at AAA. And I think sort of the goal for him this offseason is to cut that swing and miss rate, right? Like with his speed, he's the kind of guy that should be putting the ball in play all the time and forcing the defense to get him out. Because once he's on base, he provides great value in the base paths. He can steal second, he can steal third. He's a really like acute and smart base runner. Like there were several, I can think of like 2 or 3 games where he made an incredible base running play that like led directly to runs, where it was like runner on second, ground ball to the right side of the infield, reading that the second baseman was having a tough time getting to the ball in shallow right field, and he takes the hard turn around third base, sees the ball is not in somebody's glove, and takes off for home and scores a run, right? So little things like that, like they add up, and I think that's one thing that will always give Z a chance to be a meaningfully good baseball player.
And that's something that always like kind of gets me for guys that are coming up from, Altoona, from Greensboro, is I wonder, and it's been talked about a million times. Everybody kind of talks about it, is that, in Greensboro and throughout, the Sally League, there are a decent amount of fields where, it almost makes you want to hunt power, because as a baseball player, it is pretty cool to hit home runs. I mean, if you had a choice between hitting a double and having to leg it out and getting, fireworks going off and jogging around the bases, I mean, obviously we would all choose, to hit a home run. And it kind of feels like that some, players more than not have to make that adjustment. I mean, we've kind of seen it with, Matt Frazier in the past. He definitely has a little bit more power, but it's just like their swings almost change to a degree in their first little bit of time coming up to Altoona, and realizing that, it's not a huge field out there, but I mean, when you look at them comparatively speaking, it's a whole different ballgame.
It's dramatically different. And, even me covering Pirates minor leaguers for 4 seasons now, like I still have no idea how to evaluate hitting prospects at Greensboro, right? Like I just, I see, Sean Ross, right? Great example, hit 20 something homers this year or thereabouts, but like hit 189. So like, is Sean Ross a hitting prospect? I don't really know, right? Like it's hard to say. Like, is he just like hitting a lot of fly balls and more of them are leaving the ballpark because he's playing in small environments? Okay, like that inherently is a skill, but is that one you can transfer to a standard ballpark, right? Like Altoona is a little bit more pitcher friendly than neutral. So it is sort of a dramatic difference in the first place between the 2 home facilities. But like particularly left-handed power is really hard to get out in Altoona. I think righty power, like we saw it with Nick Samillo this year, we saw it with a few other guys that have come up from Greensboro that are right-handed hitters, make the ballpark look small, right? Like a Matt Gorski, a Malcolm Nunez, guys like that, that have big power. They can handle left field, and, they can go out to left center, like Jace Bowen, right? Like he's got the requisite power to be a 15 to 20 homer guy in a regular stadium. But like when you're talking about like a left-handed hitter, I have no idea whether the power is real or not when they're at high A. So like I kind of have to wait like 15 or 20 games to watch them in Altoona to be like, I got to watch them like hit some batting practice. Like, do they hit batting practice home runs, right? Like I got to like get a feel for it that way. So it just takes a little bit longer. And I think that like, there's the mental element of it too, right? Like from a hitter's perspective, you're just like, I'm just going to put a good swing on it and, hope for the best. And more times than not at Greensboro, it ends up over the fence, right? Like, but that's part of the challenge of moving up the minor league systems, right? Like, can you hit in every hitting environment that you will be exposed to? So it's a stop on the journey for sure.
And it could definitely have, just, some lingering effects to a degree. It's just, those types of players looking for more from them. Mentioned Siani, he himself, he was below 700 in his OPS. But then we also see guys that, take that step that, no matter what level it is, there's guys that go from Bradenton to Greensboro and kind of, struggle in the beginning. And it's just the adjustment to, the more advanced pitching, whatever it may be. But obviously you see that there is, some talent in there. And he's another guy that we talk about. I mean, it's, even with Chang, with Siani, with Bowen, that's not only just, hitting ability, but also like athleticism in general.
Sure. I mean, like, I think that's one thing that like the Pirates have been pretty good about is identifying athletes and trying to mold those guys into baseball players. I think that like that's actually a pretty good player development strategy, because you need athleticism in the game, right? Like you need to be able to manipulate your bat to hit pitches all over the strike zone. And yes, that is like an athleticism thing that you have to track and do. You need to be athletic enough to go catch the ball in the outfield, right? Like PNC Park is a very big outfield. You got to be a plus defender probably to play at PNC Park on a regular basis. So yeah, like the athleticism you mentioned with Siani is 100% there. He's a guy that I feel like got better as the year went on. He told me about it when he first got to Altoona that, he had spent the offseason hitting with his older brother, Mike Siani, and felt like he had closed up some holes in his swing. And I think that that's really important, right? Because every guy has holes, right? It's just how big are they and how often can pitchers exploit them against you? So, with what Sammy did in the offseason, that allowed him to get to the ball more often. And with his athleticism and speed, that's going to lead to more hits, more runs, more doubles, just because he's a great athlete. He can really run. And, he became one of those guys that I kind of wanted up in critical spots in the game as the year went on. He was one of those guys that you could rely upon for a good at bat every day, right? And like watching playoff baseball, Craig, right now, like it's amazing how much that matters, right? Just like taking a good at bat, seeing multiple good pitches, even if it's not a good result, right? Like even if you hit a weak ground ball to the shortstop, but it took 8 or 9 pitches to get there, you need to be able to grind out at bats, right? Like not every time are you just going to see a first pitch cookie or early in the count, you can say, okay, this guy's going to throw me a breaking ball and I'm ready for it. So, I think Sammy's the kind of guy that has the tools. He still needs a little bit more polish. His outfield routes can be a little adventurous from time to time. But a guy that, I think has really put himself back on the prospect radar with the way he played this year.
Yeah, and we'll talk about, I mean, there are times when you get, injections of players like throughout the season. And one of those is, and I should say was, Charles McAdoo. He basically became a prospect darling within the Pirates system just because, I mean, when he was drafted, everybody was looking at, I mean, obviously, who was drafted above him. And then when they got to Bradenton, everybody was looking at Mitch Jebb because, Mitch Jebb came from a larger program, was expecting more things from him. And, McAdoo was the one that just basically hit the ground running, no pun intended, from the time that he got there, then to Greensboro, kept it up in Altoona. And then when the trade deadline comes, McAdoo, who, I mean, we'd been talking about, for the entire first half of the season, is out the door. And that's kind of tough for minor league teams and for, the development of a player.
For sure. I mean, it absolutely hurt the Curve's ability to win games, right? Like we lost our three hitter. And, he had just gotten, I think he reached base in something like 21 of 27 games played. Another guy that gives you a real good at bat, right? Like puts the ball in play, hits the ball hard, and is a way better third baseman than I think anybody expected. I remember talking about this with Gary Green after we'd had Mac for probably 2-3 weeks. Yeah, probably around then. And I was like, sort of what's your read on where McAdoo is defensively? And he's like, he's great. Like there's not he's like, there's little things, there's repetition things we need to work at so he becomes more comfortable with them. But in general, he makes the routine play all the time. And that is like the most basic thing, right? Because routine plays in the big leagues, they got to be outs. You can't give your opponent extra outs. Those guys will make you pay up there. Just, they do in the minors a little bit here and there, but not as often as when you get to the major league roster. So, that was something that sort of surprised me about McAdoo, that he was a lot better defensively than I was told, which is a good thing, right? But, I think I sort of understand the Pirates' perspective on moving him. They obviously had made a decision about they wanted to add at this deadline, and McAdoo was a guy who played his way into conversations in trade rooms, I'm sure, right? Like hits for a ton of power, seems to be totally fine at third base. Like he's got a chance to be a pretty valuable major league player. And, you can wring your hands about the trade return, but Isaiah Kiner-Falefa might be the starting shortstop next year. So that's already like a good return in the first place, that you have like sort of a veteran who you can trust to at least make the routine plays in the field and, give you the freedom to move Oneil Cruz to the outfield.
And when we hopped on here, we kind of talked about it that, Pirates fans, have been calling for, trading some of this prospect capital. And then when it happens, it's like, oh, well, no, not that guy, because we like that guy now. But it's sometimes you do have to make those difficult decisions. And we also talked about, how that could have affected McAdoo because, once he went over within the system, I think he went over to New Hampshire, I believe it was.
Yeah.
His OPS dropped from, the upper 800s to just, scratching over 600. So, I mean, we'll have to see how he adjusts when he comes back because, I mean, the hitting programs are different. The other thing of, hey, I have my mind set on a certain thing, like I will make it to PNC Park. And now you have to completely change, who do I have to beat out? Whose job do I need to take? Who am I competing with?
Yeah.
What people do they have at that position? Do they have, a third baseman? Do they have, I know he can play outfield as well, that I could beat out, or do they have somebody locked up in that position? So, I mean, it definitely can have, a little bit of an effect on a player's psyche. But we've talked a lot about the hitting side. We need to go to the pitching side for a little bit. There were ups and downs, once again, with everything. I mean, it kind of seems like at times the games that I was watching, the bullpen struggled mightily at times. Some of the starting pitchers, one for me was Po Yu Chen, got off to a very slow start, had some, sparks throughout the season, showed some stuff that I had really not seen from him a lot. A little bit more swing and miss than I had remembered at times. But on the pitching side, overall, the team not performing, very well. Talking about those strikeouts, they were last in the league in strikeouts with 1,129. The WHIP was sitting ninth in the league. ERA sits ninth in the league. But there were some bright spots. So I'm not going to go like all gloom and doom here. I can't, because there were some guys that, did perform well. And the ones that did perform well, what ends up happening is they move on their way up to Indianapolis, which is a good thing for, the team, in general, the organization, but for the Curve, it just kind of leaves you a little bit empty handed at times.
Oh yeah. I mean, you're not just going to like call up your high A team and find a replacement for Bubba Chandler and Braxton Ashcraft, right? Like those guys are pretty unique. And those are guys that like, they don't just grow on trees, right? And I think that looking back on sort of the pitching element for Altoona this year, like those couple starting pitchers, I think really had great years, right? Chandler, Ashcraft, Thomas Harrington, Po Yu Chen's in that mix. I think Sean Sullivan actually had a really nice year too. And if not for the shoulder thing late in the year, he probably finishes at Indy. He ended up missing the second half. I think Hunter Barco's got a lot of good things going on. We only saw him for like 4 innings because he had the little leg thing. But those individual guys are I think what you sort of have to focus on in terms of pitching in Altoona. Like I think that progress from those guys was probably more important than the curve, having a team ERA under 4.1, right? And I think that like it was tough to watch at times when the curve bullpen couldn't hold a lead. That weekend against Portland in late May into early June, where Kyle Teal hit a game-tying homer in back-to-back days, literally with 2 strikes and 2 outs in the 9th inning both times. That's kind of hard to watch. But there is something there. There's a couple other guys that I think like have a pretty good chance to get there. I think Eddie Yean was deserving of every accolade and every headline or story that's written about him. Like steady Eddie, man. Like once you got through sort of like the 3rd or 4th week of the season, you sort of realized that he was the guy, right? Like he was the fireman that, big spot, 7th, 8th inning. We needed a guy to go 2 innings to save a game. He was the guy. Heavy fastball, man, like 94 to 96 with good sink across the zone. He's still playing around with his secondary stuff. Like he's trying to find the right slider that's going to fit for him or the right breaking ball that's going to fit for him. But, he showed enough of something else to keep guys off of his fastball. And look, when you're pitching at the end of games, sometimes all you need is one pitch if it's an elite pitch, like the fastball is for him. I think a couple of the other lefties we saw over the course of the year have a good chance. Jaden Woods is still pretty young, but like, let me tell you, man, tools, crazy good tools. 93 to 95, real good slider, feel for a changeup, can go multiple innings. He came up from Greensboro and kind of like fit into a closer role pretty quickly. He and Luis Peralta was another trade this year for Jalen Beeks. I'm all in on Peralta, by the way. I think that guy's pretty darn good. So it was sort of a bummer for me to see Luis go because I just gotten to know him a little bit in the 3-4 weeks that we had him, and it seems like a guy that you could get along with and like was like pretty well liked in the clubhouse. So that was tough to see him go, but like those 2 guys and Cy Nielsen, I think, is another guy that you can't give up on because he's just got a nasty slider, man. Like, and it's 92 to 93 with good movement. If Cy Nielsen throws, I don't know, 20% more strikes, he's a big leaguer next week, right? Like, so there's some tools there, but you kind of have to like squint with some of the guys that were on the mountain Altoona this year.
Yeah, that Luis Peralta one. I mean, I feel like for the Pirates prospect fans, that one hit harder than some of the other ones, or some of the other ones might have, just because it was kind of like a guy we felt like we had like in our back pocket. It wasn't somebody that I felt like a lot of people knew about. But just watching him and seeing that he would do. And after the trade was made, there was at least a few of us on a little bit of like a text chain or like a DM chain that just basically said, if our bullpen was struggling that badly, why didn't we just bring up Luis and just let him try it out? Just because his stuff was electric. But I mean, best of luck to him. He did perform well, and especially he performed well with Colorado. It wasn't like he performed well, like, in a giant, like, cavernous ball. He performed like in high altitude. So that one was tough.
God, yeah.
But are there any other guys here as we're winding down here that you can think of on either the hitting side that you may be looking, can maybe come into their own next year, take a step forward, or on the pitching side? You don't even have to think, 1 or 2 guys for each of them, but just some guys that, we may not be thinking about.
I mean, I think Kervin Pichardo put himself on the radar this year. Not a guy that's like super sexy, right? Like not a guy that's going to have like a real sexy headline like a Termar Johnson or something like that, but a guy who just gives you good at bats. Puts the ball in play regularly. I think he's got a very strong arm. He can probably handle second and third base, shortstop in an emergency. But he hit enough this year that you said to yourself, okay, there's something there. I know Jace Bowen had sort of an up and down year, but he is such a good athlete, and like it's plus almost double plus in center field. Like that is really valuable. So I think, he's probably not that far away from like making a hitting adjustment or two that, unlocks maybe less swing and miss, maybe mentality change a little bit because he sees a ton of spin, right? Like guys throw sliders 90% of the time to him. Yeah, I think those two guys on the hitting side, and I think coming into next year, guys like Sean Sullivan and Dominic Parachi both have chances to like shoot themselves way up the organizational charts, right? Like Sullivan is a guy that I expect, to come back healthy next year and probably push for a AAA job. Like I'd be surprised if he came back to Altoona next year, but like it might just be a numbers game where they're like, we want to keep you on a 5-man turn, and we don't have enough spots at AAA for you. And I think Dominic Parachi has a chance too, right? Like he's 90 to 94. It's a pretty good curveball. And he has a history of throwing strikes, right? Like you look at his numbers in Greensboro, throws a ton of strikes. Didn't allow a home run pitching in that ballpark as, a guy who made every turn in the rotation there from early May to early August. So, Parachi, I think, is a guy that has a chance to, another way under the radar guy, 11th round pick out of a D3, South A. Regina in Rhode Island, which is a noted baseball powerhouse. So, yeah, like sometimes you have to, there's going to be a couple of finds like that each year. And I think, those guys going into next year are probably guys that are a big part of what Altoona does to start next season.
Yeah, and I will be looking forward to next season for the Curve. Hopefully I make it out beyond the one game that I made it to, the first game out there. But I wanted to go out there because I believe Ashcraft started. Dylan Cruz was in the game. There was a few other players that I was looking forward to seeing. And then the summer, as always, just kind of gets away from you. So I had to check out Greensboro, had to check out Myrtle Beach. And every single time I wanted to come out and check out the Curve again, there's just always something going on. But I definitely will make it out more than once. I usually make it out once a month. I don't know what happened to me this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you got to line up the pitching a little bit better. Like, you're only 2 hours away. Like, you can get to us.
I know. It's like I can't. We're gonna have to call my son's like baseball game short or something because we got to get in the car and get out to Altoona. But John, as always, brother, it is great talking with you. For those of you that don't, go follow John. Once again, that's no H and @ spelled with a Z. Maybe I'll run into you in Bradenton again this year. I mean,
that'd be nice. Yeah, see you at the spring breakout game.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, dude. You have a good one, brother.
Yeah, appreciate you, man. See ya. A pitcher of beer, a pitcher of beer. Let's order another pitcher of beer. That pitcher of beer should come over here. I love that pitcher of beer.
I got to apologize on this one, guys. I'm in the podcast world. This isn't the weekly podcast that I always put it out to be. I recorded with Andy Durham from Greensboro just a couple of days ago. John and I's schedules kind of meshed together 2 days later because I'm getting busy here towards the end of the week and the beginning of next week and over the weekend with fall festivities, kind of coming together. So I have not had a chance to have even a single drink, a single beer, a single sip of beer since I recorded with Andy. So the one thing I did want to do is I wanted to give kind of a shout out to the breweries that I've been at around the Altoona Curve, the PNG field, and around Altoona and the surrounding area. The number one for me is Levity Brewing Company. They also, they started out and their main one is in Indiana, PA, which is closer to me and closer to where my family lives. I grew up, 20 minutes outside of Indiana, Pennsylvania. They have a Levity Brewing in Altoona now. If you have a chance, go and check them out. Some of the best food that I've had in Altoona to go along with my craft beers is at Marzoni's Brick Oven and Brewing. The beer was good. The food was amazing. Not too far from the ballpark if you're on your way out there. So that is one for you. And the last one is Railroad City Brewing Company. It was great, nice, relaxing brewery, great staff, great beer. So go check them out. If I'm missing any, get into the comments underneath this episode on Facebook, on YouTube, on X, wherever it may be. Put out your favorite breweries that are around Altoona. And then hopefully, before we make our way out to Indianapolis, I will be able to get my hands on some craft beer. If I don't, there's something wrong with the weekend coming up and heading out to some, I believe, pumpkin patches or, whatever it may be. There's always at the ones that we go to, they either have a brewery there with like a little truck or something, giving some beer out. So, but until next time, guys, it's go Scottsdale Scorpions time. Get on there, watch some AFL baseball.